I would hope that any parent who, God forbid, would be in our situation, I would hope that you would do the same thing. I would hope that you would ask for any help, receive any help to get answers, because at the end of the day, that's all we want. We just want to know. We just want to know what happened and why our baby didn't come home. Like that's our biggest thing.
We're joined now by the family's attorney, Ben Crump. Mr. Crump, thank you for being with us. What's the latest you've heard from state or local officials about where the investigation stands and what they believe happened to Nolan Wells?
The only thing we've heard is what was suggested at the very beginning before any forensics was done. Seemed like before any interviews or interrogation of any of the witnesses who were on the boat, and that is, they don't believe it's any foul play. They think it was an accidental drowning. That has been the suggestion, and that's very troubling for Christine and Elmore, the parents of Nolan Wells, as many of us in the Black community, because we believe that they are trying to sweep this matter under the rug, especially when you think about the history of the state of Mississippi when it comes to Black people being killed in highly questionable situations and nobody ever having any accountability.
Local officials said that the friends are cooperating with the investigation. Is that true? And what explanation, if any, have his friends given for leaving the island without him?
You know, we don't know the level of cooperation the friends are engaging in, because they all have retained attorneys. But what Nolan's family and friends feel like, had the roles been reversed and that these had been 3 young Black men and there was only 1 young white man and he ended up dead, that the investigation would be much more zealous, that there would be interrogations, they would be separated, they would be held for all kinds of crimes and misdemeanors until somebody started to talk, that they would challenge the narrative that has been presented, and that being that Nolan voluntarily said he's going to stay behind, and his parents and friends outright reject that. They said that is not of Nolan's character or disposition, and had he done so, would he have ever not wanted his cell phone? We're talking about an 18-year-old kid. And so many things are troubling and conflict when they listen to these narratives, try to explain why Nolan Wells went out with them on the boat. They all came back alive, and Nolan was washed up on the shore unalive.
You shared a photo on social media that appears to show Nolan Wells at a land-based pool party in Jackson County on July 5th. We have the photo there on the screen, and there's a red circle, and he is in one of those red circles. And now this was a day before he was found dead. How does this photo call the timeline into question?
Well, so many people, and that's the thing that gives us hope that we will finally get to the truth of what really happened, because so many young people are talking and they're sharing photographs and they're sharing videos and they're calling our call center and telling us that they were on Horn Island. And so I think the photograph that you're displaying is one that was presented to Nolan's mother and to my office, that we shared on social media, to simply say that if people have any information about who's in this photograph, when it was taken, where they were located at when they took this photograph, it would be very helpful, because there are many things in that photograph that we think can help build to what was the atmosphere on that July 4th weekend.
There are certainly at this point more questions than answers. What does his family, what does Nolan Wells' family want the public to understand about him beyond the circumstances of his untimely death?
You know, everybody, not just his mother and father, but everybody who's talked about Nolan Wells talks about what an angel of a person he was, how he was this gifted college football player, student athlete, how he was so considerate during school that he would always try to help people, no matter who they were. They said Nolan's smile would just brighten a room. They talked about how Nolan was a person who was responsible. So that's why they dispute him saying, I'm just going to stay on the island. And when you think about the conflict and statements between the young lady he was talking to, who said he told her that he was going to get back into the boat with the boys. And then the boys said that Nolan said he was going to stay and talk with her. Obviously, the statements conflict with one another. And that's one of many contradictions and conflicts that are glaring in this case. And so we're just trying to ferociously search for the truth.
There are moments in an investigation when the biggest breakthrough isn't a new piece of evidence. It's a single sentence. A carefully chosen sentence that tells you exactly what investigators want the public to know, and perhaps just as importantly, what they don't. For more than 2 weeks, questions surrounding Nolan Wells' death have multiplied faster than answers. Rumors have spread across social media. Viral videos have been dissected frame by frame. Friends have found themselves accused. Families have become targets. And somewhere beneath all of the speculation, one unanswered question has continued to haunt everyone following this case. What really happened after Nolan was last seen alive? But then something unusual happened. The FBI broke its silence. Not with a dramatic press conference. Not with an arrest. Not with a shocking revelation. Instead, federal investigators released a carefully worded public statement that changed the entire conversation surrounding this investigation. And hidden inside that statement was a detail many people almost overlooked, one that may completely reshape how this case is understood. Before we uncover everything that statement actually says, and perhaps even more importantly, what it doesn't say, I want to ask you something. If stories like Nolan's deserve to be investigated carefully instead of being buried beneath rumors, take 1 second to subscribe. Every subscriber helps these cases continue reaching people who care about facts over speculation. If even one family someday receives answers because more people stayed informed instead of scrolling away, that single click will have mattered far more than most people realize. Because tonight isn't about sensational headlines. It's about separating verified facts from assumptions. And that distinction may ultimately determine how this entire investigation is remembered. Most investigations follow a familiar pattern. Police gather evidence. Witnesses speak. Experts analyze the facts. Eventually, investigators reveal what happened. But this case has unfolded in almost the exact opposite direction. Public attention arrived before investigators had the opportunity to finish their work. Within hours of Nolan's disappearance, social media began filling the empty spaces where confirmed information should have been. One rumor became 2. 2 became 10. Then dozens. Every photograph was treated as a clue. Every witness became a suspect. Every silence became evidence of something darker. It's a pattern we've seen before. When people desperately want answers, the human brain has an incredible tendency to manufacture certainty from uncertainty. Psychologists even have a name for it. Our minds naturally fill incomplete stories with explanations that feel satisfying, even when there's no evidence supporting them. That instinct isn't unique to this investigation. It's deeply human. But in cases involving real families experiencing unimaginable grief, assumptions can become almost as damaging as lies. That's exactly why the FBI's statement matters. Not because it solves the mystery, because it quietly dismantles several assumptions that had been growing louder by the day. For weeks, one question continued appearing everywhere. Why was the FBI involved? To many observers, federal involvement immediately suggested something extraordinary. Some believed local investigators had uncovered evidence pointing toward a far larger criminal investigation. Others claimed the Bureau had secretly taken control of the case. Still others insisted federal agents had been brought in because local authorities couldn't be trusted. The theories multiplied daily. But here's where the story suddenly shifts. The FBI finally addressed those questions directly. According to its official statement, the Jackson County Sheriff's Office remains the lead investigative agency and will continue leading the investigation from beginning to end. The Bureau described its role as providing specialized federal resources, investigative partnerships, and technical assistance while supporting local investigators, not replacing them. That distinction may sound subtle. It isn't, because one sentence quietly erased weeks of speculation. Federal involvement does not automatically mean federal control, yet that's only the beginning. Buried deeper inside the statement was another sentence receiving far less attention. One that introduces an entirely different mystery. The FBI confirmed that part of its involvement concerns interstate threats directed toward individuals connected to this case. Think about that carefully. Not threats connected directly to Nolan's death. Threats directed toward people connected to the investigation. It's an important difference, because while many viewers immediately interpreted federal involvement as evidence surrounding Nolan himself, the official statement points towards something else entirely. Protecting people, not prosecuting a homicide, at least not according to anything publicly confirmed. And suddenly, another question appears. Who exactly was being threatened? The FBI didn't say. What kind of threats? They didn't specify. Who sent them? Also unanswered. At first glance, that lack of detail might seem frustrating, but investigators often remain intentionally vague during active investigations for good reason. Repeating threats publicly can encourage copycats. Naming victims can expose them to even greater danger. Revealing investigative methods can compromise future prosecutions. Sometimes, saying less protects more. That doesn't make the mystery disappear. If anything, it deepens it. Because now we're left with two separate investigations unfolding simultaneously. One seeking answers about Nolan's final hours, another protecting people caught in the aftermath. And somewhere between those two investigations lies a story far more complicated than anyone first imagined. Remember that, because in a few minutes, another development will completely change how one of this case's biggest contradictions should be viewed. But before we get there, we need to understand why witness accounts became such a central focus in the first place. One of the biggest challenges investigators face isn't determining whether someone is lying. It's determining whether two honest people can remember the same event differently. The answer is yes. Far more often than most people realize. Human memory isn't a video recording. It's reconstruction. Every conversation, every stressful moment, every assumption gets filtered through emotion, attention, and time. That's why detectives rarely depend on one statement alone. Instead, they compare dozens, looking for places where independent accounts overlap. Not because identical stories prove truth, but because consistent details often survive even imperfect memories. That brings us to one of the most discussed people connected to this investigation. A young woman named Katie. For days, her name circulated online almost entirely through second-hand accounts. Friends quoted relatives. Relatives responded online. Screenshots spread faster than context. And before long, many people believed they already understood her story. Except, they didn't. Because until recently, almost everything attributed to Katie had traveled through someone else first. That changed after she reportedly met face-to-face with Nolan's mother. It's difficult to overstate how significant that meeting is. For the first time, the conversation moved beyond screenshots and social media posts. Two people sat down privately, one searching for answers, the other trying to explain the last confirmed conversation she had with Nolan. According to Nolan's mother, Katie explained something remarkably specific. She believed Nolan intended to return to his friends after they spent time together. Notice the wording. She believed. Not, she watched him board the boat. Not, she physically saw him rejoin his group. She explained that Nolan told her his plan. She assumed he followed through. Those two ideas sound almost identical. They're not, and that single distinction changes how investigators may interpret everything that follows. Because if Katie never actually witnessed Nolan returning, then one critical gap remains. What happened after he expressed that intention? That missing window of time has become one of the most important unanswered questions in the entire investigation, and answering it may ultimately explain why so many conflicting narratives emerged afterward. But here's where the story becomes even more complicated. Because while witness memories remain under scrutiny, investigators are also waiting on something that cannot be influenced by memory at all. Science. Multiple forensic examinations are still underway. Autopsy findings remain pending. Independent medical analysis continues. Digital evidence has yet to be fully reviewed. And Nolan's phone, perhaps one of the most potentially important pieces of evidence in the case, has not yet publicly produced the answers many people expected. That's important, because until forensic evidence speaks, every theory remains exactly that. A theory. We'll examine those forensic questions next. And one development involving Nolan's phone could become one of the biggest turning points in this investigation. But before we continue, I want to ask something. If you've stayed with this story this far, you're probably here because you care more about getting the truth than simply hearing the loudest rumor. Consider subscribing now, because we're committed to following verified developments through every stage of this investigation, including the forensic results, grand jury proceedings, and any future official findings. The people who stay informed from beginning to end are often the ones who help prevent misinformation from becoming accepted as fact. Every investigation eventually reaches a point where opinions begin colliding with evidence. This case hasn't reached that point yet. And that's exactly why every new development carries so much weight. Right now, investigators aren't simply asking what happened to Nolan Wells. They're trying to determine which pieces of information can actually be proven. That's a far more difficult question. Because evidence doesn't care about assumptions. It doesn't care about social media theories. And it certainly doesn't care which narrative gains the most attention online. It only answers one question. What can be verified? That brings us to one of the most closely watched pieces of evidence in the entire investigation: Nolan's phone. Think about how much of our lives exist inside a single device. Locations, messages, photos, search history, call logs, app activity, timestamps. Sometimes, a smartphone tells investigators more about someone's final hours than any witness ever could. But here's what makes this case unusual. The phone isn't simply being reviewed by one investigative team. According to statements from the family's legal representatives, investigators and the family's independent experts are expected to coordinate their examination of the device. That detail matters, not because it guarantees agreement, but because it creates an opportunity for independent experts to evaluate the same digital evidence. If their findings align, confidence grows. If they don't, entirely new questions emerge, and those questions could shape everything that follows. Before that examination even begins, though, another major process remains unfinished. Actually, two of them. Both the state autopsy and an independent autopsy are still pending. That may sound like a routine update. It isn't. Autopsy findings often answer questions no witness possibly can. They establish timelines, identify injuries, clarify medical conditions. Sometimes they eliminate theories. Other times they create entirely new ones. But until those reports are complete, investigators remain in an unusual position. They're gathering puzzle pieces without yet knowing what the final picture looks like. Imagine trying to solve a 1,000-piece puzzle while someone keeps handing you pieces from different boxes. That's where this investigation sits today. Some pieces clearly belong, others might not. The challenge is determining which is which. And while investigators continue assembling those facts, public speculation hasn't slowed down. If anything, it's accelerated. That's one of the unfortunate realities of modern investigations. Information travels instantly. Verification does not. One viral clip can reach millions of people before detectives have even interviewed everyone involved. One misleading headline can reshape public opinion long before forensic evidence ever arrives. We've seen it happen repeatedly in this case. Remember the photograph many people believed proved Nolan had attended a gathering after the 4th of July? For several days, that image fueled enormous speculation. If true, it would have dramatically altered the known timeline. Except, it wasn't true. The image was later reported to have been taken more than a week earlier. One incorrect assumption, thousands of conclusions built upon it. Then another example emerged. A widely shared video was described online as capturing Nolan during a confrontation shortly before his disappearance. Again, people reached conclusions almost immediately. But according to later reporting, the voice heard in that recording belonged to someone else entirely. Two viral moments, two assumptions. Neither ultimately confirmed the narrative many people believed. It's a powerful reminder that investigations don't become clearer simply because more content appears online. Sometimes they become harder to understand. Because separating fact from fiction grows increasingly difficult. That's why experienced investigators often move more slowly than the public wants. Not because they're inactive, because they're careful. Every conclusion has consequences, especially when real people are involved. One mistaken accusation can permanently damage someone's life, even if they're later cleared. That's something Nolan's family has repeatedly emphasized. Their focus has remained on finding answers, not assigning blame before investigators finish their work. And yet another major development suggests this investigation may eventually enter an entirely different phase. A grand jury. According to public statements from attorney Ben Crump, once investigators complete their work, the evidence is expected to be presented to a grand jury. For many viewers, those two words immediately sound dramatic. Grand jury. But here's something important. A grand jury doesn't automatically mean someone will be charged. Nor does it automatically mean investigators have concluded a crime occurred. In many jurisdictions, referring certain deaths to a grand jury is simply part of the legal process whenever circumstances require additional review. That's where legal opinions surrounding this case begin to diverge. Some legal observers argue the referral demonstrates investigators are taking every possible step. Others caution against interpreting routine legal procedure as evidence that a particular outcome is inevitable. Both perspectives deserve consideration. Because neither side possesses information the public hasn't yet seen, they're interpreting process, not predicting verdicts. And that distinction matters. As this investigation continues, one lesson keeps repeating itself. Questions are easy. Answers require patience. Still, there's one aspect of this case that extends beyond evidence, beyond courtrooms, and beyond investigative procedure: the emotional cost. Imagine being 18 years old. Imagine spending an ordinary summer day with friends. Now imagine that day becoming the subject of national attention. Imagine every interaction replayed endlessly online, every word examined, every decision questioned. Whether your family, a friend, or simply someone who crossed paths with Nolan that day, life changes forever. That's one reason investigators often urge restraint during active cases. Witnesses are human beings, not headlines. Some may carry information they're afraid to share. Others may genuinely struggle to remember events accurately after trauma. And increasingly, some may hesitate because of something else entirely: fear. The FBI's statement confirmed interstate threats connected to this case. Regardless of who received them or what they contained, one consequence becomes immediately obvious. Threats don't help investigations. They hurt them. Imagine possessing information investigators need, then watching strangers online target people connected to the case. Would you feel safer speaking or quieter? That's the hidden damage intimidation creates. It doesn't merely frighten individuals, it can discourage cooperation altogether. Every threatening message potentially pushes the truth a little farther away. That's something worth remembering before anyone shares another accusation online. Because the people reading those comments aren't fictional characters. They're living through one of the hardest chapters of their lives. If you're still watching, it tells me you care about where this investigation actually leads, not just where rumors point it. Subscribe now if you haven't already. The coming weeks may bring forensic findings, legal developments, and official updates that change how today's unanswered questions are understood. Staying informed from verified sources matters now more than ever. But even with all of these developments, one question refuses to disappear. If Katie believed Nolan intended to return to his friends, and investigators have not publicly established exactly what happened afterward, then what filled that missing gap? That window of time has become the center of this entire mystery. And in the next part, we'll examine how the FBI's clarification, Katie's first-hand account, the reported threats, and the approaching funeral all converge into a single emotional turning point that changes the way many people began looking at this case. One detail from the eve of Nolan's funeral, in particular, reveals just how deeply this tragedy has affected far more people than anyone first realized. There comes a point in every investigation when the loudest voices have said everything they're going to say. After that, only the evidence continues speaking. That's where the Nolan Wells investigation now stands. Over the past several weeks, we've watched 4 separate stories unfold at the same time. The first was the investigation itself. The second was the explosion of public speculation. The third was a grieving family's relentless search for answers. And the fourth was the extraordinary pressure placed on nearly everyone connected to this tragedy. Each thread has shaped the others. Each has added another layer of complexity. Yet despite everything we've learned, the central question remains exactly where it began. What happened to Nolan Wells during those final unaccounted-for moments? Today, we know more than we did at the beginning. But we still don't know enough to draw final conclusions. And perhaps that's the most important lesson this case has offered. Sometimes, the hardest part of seeking justice isn't finding evidence. It's resisting the temptation to replace missing evidence with certainty. The FBI's public statement gave investigators' role much-needed clarity. Federal assistance is real. But so is the Jackson County Sheriff's leadership of this investigation. Those two facts are no longer competing narratives. They exist together. The Bureau also confirmed that federal resources are addressing interstate threats connected to individuals involved in this case. That revelation reminds us that tragedies often create victims beyond the original loss. No family, no witness, no teenager, no friend should ever become the target of threats simply because they are connected to an active investigation. Whatever happened to Nolan, intimidation only makes discovering the truth more difficult. Then there's Katie's account. For weeks, much of what the public believed about her came through second-hand conversations, social media posts, and assumptions. But after meeting directly with Nolan's mother, a more careful picture emerged. She described Nolan's stated intention, not something she personally witnessed afterward. That distinction may seem small. Investigators know it isn't, because entire cases have turned on details exactly like that. The difference between assuming someone arrived somewhere and actually seeing them arrive can completely reshape an investigation. It also leaves us with one unavoidable question. If Nolan intended to return, what happened before that intention became reality, or failed to? Somewhere inside that unanswered gap lies information investigators are still trying to uncover. Then there are the forensic processes still moving quietly behind the scenes. The state autopsy, the independent autopsy, the coordinated examination of Nolan's phone, potential digital evidence, witness interviews. Each process operates on its own timeline. Unlike social media, science cannot be rushed, facts cannot be voted into existence, and investigators cannot announce conclusions before evidence supports them. That's why patience, although frustrating, remains essential. As difficult as waiting may be, getting the answer right matters far more than getting it quickly. Another significant milestone now waits ahead: a grand jury review. Legal experts have offered different interpretations of what that process may ultimately mean. Some see it as an encouraging sign. Others caution against reading too much into what can often be standard legal procedure. Only the evidence presented there will determine what comes next. Not headlines, not speculation, not public opinion. Evidence. And that is exactly how justice is supposed to work. But before this investigation reaches courtrooms, before reports become public, before questions finally receive answers, something far more personal has already taken place. Nolan's family has had to do something no parent should ever experience. They've had to say goodbye. Behind every document, every interview, every press conference, every update, there remains a family grieving the loss of an 18-year-old son, friends mourning someone they expected to see again, teammates adjusting to an empty place where Nolan once stood. It's easy, after weeks of following an investigation, to become focused on timelines, witness statements, and forensic evidence. But investigations exist because someone is missing. Someone mattered. Someone's absence changed countless lives forever. That truth should never become secondary to the mystery itself. If there's one thing this case has revealed, it's how quickly unanswered questions can become public battles. We've watched assumptions spread faster than confirmations. We've seen isolated moments pulled from their context. We've witnessed how incomplete information can divide communities before investigators finish gathering facts. It's a reminder that every person following a case carries responsibility too. The responsibility to ask difficult questions, but also the responsibility to wait for honest answers. Those two things can exist together. In fact, justice depends on both. Now I'd genuinely like to hear your thoughts. Based only on the officially confirmed information available today, not rumors or speculation, what do you believe investigators still need to answer before this case can finally make sense? Do you think the key lies in forensic evidence, digital data, witness testimony, or is there another missing piece that hasn't yet become public? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments. Some of the best discussions happen when people focus on evidence instead of assumptions. And if you've stayed with me through this entire documentary, thank you. Your willingness to spend time understanding the facts, instead of chasing sensational headlines, genuinely makes a difference. If this investigation has reminded you why careful reporting matters, please consider leaving a like. It helps more people discover fact-based coverage rather than misinformation. If you've found value in following this case from verified update to verified update, subscribe and join our growing community. Every new investigation we cover is approached with the same commitment: to separate confirmed facts from speculation, to respect the people at the center of these stories, and to follow every major development until the truth becomes clearer. And finally, if there's one lesson this case leaves us with, it's this: answers often arrive quietly, not through viral posts, not through anonymous claims, but through patient investigation, careful evidence, and the people who refuse to stop searching for the truth. Nolan Wells was 18 years old. His family is still waiting. Investigators are still working. The evidence is still being examined. And until every verified answer has been uncovered, this story is not over. We'll continue following every official development as it happens. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you in the next investigation.